Well, good morning and welcome, Bill Leitner. It's our third interview in the last few months because we are on the exciting topic of constructing maybe a fourplex or a sixplex on a literally a residential lot. And we discussed the introduction of, I think, Bill 44 in July. And so today we're going to just review where we're at, but we're also this week in the middle of the most crazy election we've ever seen in British Columbia, where the NDP and the Conservatives are tied neck on neck, and likely it's going to be maybe a minority government, and all that will be discussed as it relates to what each one of those parties has in mind for us in the business. But also, I think it's really important that we look at what are currently, we live in all governments. Doesn't matter who it is, we survive them all because we're in business. So we're going to look at feasible development sites, the impact of timelines for yearly returns, the biggest risk, all of those exciting things. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Ozzie. Appreciate you having me.
So when we discussed the implementation of Bill 44, how did it get accepted throughout BC?
Bill 44 has been accepted in varying ways across most cities in Metro Vancouver. You have cities like Vancouver who independently changed their multiplex zoning before the provincial announcements, and cities like Burnaby who are already 2 years into the process of updating multifamily on single family properties and accepted the provincial mandates in a very proactive way and a pro-housing with pro-housing policies. Number of other cities adopted them in more limited fashions, and there's three main categories that we break these cities. First is the entitlement. Do they allow you to sell the 4 to 6 units individually like townhomes, or do they force you to have duplexes with basement suites? There was one city, White Rock, who went one step further and said you can only hold them as one title, rental building 4 to 6 units.
Makes a huge difference for the developer.
Very hard to make the revenue numbers work when you only are selling duplexes, especially in the Fraser Valley, that the price per square foot or the gross revenues aren't exceeding the single family resale prices in a significant way.
So it's absolutely vital for the listeners that are interested in this, find out where your municipality stands. Go there and talk to the planning department, and because you might waste a lot of time planning a great thing and it works well until you go to the city and they say, oh, well, you can't do that.
We unfortunately had that experience with a few of your listeners and the Engage Real Estate Action Group, clients of yours who we work together on the feasibility of their sites. For example, Delta, which only allow for a 0.35 FSR, equating to 800 square foot units and very limited saleability and revenue potential as well.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, government has a great idea, and then the devil always is in the details. One of the biggest devils I saw, and you pointed that out to us a couple of months ago, was, I believe it was Bill 14, the offsite regulations. How has that been accepted, or has it been changed?
But we were very concerned about Bill 14, which allowed for cities to require service upgrades to the storm water, drainage, and gas lines, not just the connections to the property line, but the downstream connections to the main line, which in some cases, if you think of Capitol Hill and Burnaby, could be 3 or 4 blocks before you get down to Hastings Street at a significant cost to the developer.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got to get Hydro together, you've got to get the planning department, you got them together. I mean, the costs can be outlandish.
The good news is Burnaby released their engineering requirements at the end of September, and Burnaby's taken the position that they are not going to require the developer to upgrade downstream infrastructure.
Well, that's a huge change.
Burnaby suggested that their development cost charges will cover all of the downstream upgrades, but in Burnaby, you are responsible for adding curb and gutters, separated sidewalks, and street lights as part of your multiplex development application.
But at least you know what it is. It isn't waiting a day before you remove subject. So before you get the permit, it's saying, oh, by the way, the site costs are $2 million, right? At least it's not a surprise. But it does show why somebody like you is needed. I mean, you have a course on it. You explain to people it could be a great deal, but it also could bite you in the behind if you don't have your ducks in a row.
Ozzie, one of the major items to look for that came out of that engineering meeting for any of the listeners who are interested in investing into Burnaby is the city also suggested that they may require road widening, which would be dedications off the property given back to the city for free.
So you lose that on your building envelope.
For example, standard road is 60 feet. And we were looking at a development opportunity that the current road width was a half road. If we were to purchase that site, the city would have requested at least 10 feet, which would be half of that 20 feet on each side, or potentially could ask for the entire 20 feet to be dedicated to the city for road widening.
Well, that's crazy. But that in fact, it really is crazy. What's the point in making all these big announcements and then when you get down to the municipal level, we can't do it. Now, the other thing is that small towns, they don't have the staff or the wherewithal, the planning and to do all these things. How has it been accepted in small town BC?
We haven't seen much uptake in the smaller towns. Most of our focus has been on Metro Vancouver, from West Vancouver to Langley, Delta to Mission. So I haven't explored too many of the secondary markets. We're more focused here on Greater Vancouver and the Lower Mainland.
Whatever happened in North Van and West Van? They were originally all against it, or
very limited uptake. And even with being pushed to adopt new zoning bylaws, there still found ways within that flexibility that each city had to either ensure that the floor space ratios are so small that the unit sizes are too small to be feasible, or the infrastructure upgrades would be too much of a burden to move forward. Very limited uptake on the North Shore.
I find that, it's, I know that originally, West Van said, okay, we do it on 1.4% of our land, or then the government says we're going to appoint somebody to force you to do it. Where does that stand? Have they ever actually enforced that, appointed somebody?
We haven't seen anyone be enforcing it on behalf of the cities. The cities have still been working through the process and adopted the zoning in a limited way that essentially makes it not feasible, or as if they never made any changes. But this is where the conversation of the next provincial government is going to be interesting, because this will dictate how aggressive the provincial government can continue to be in having cities update their zoning bylaws to be feasible for development.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole world is changing. I'm just reading in Ontario, for instance, now they'll have municipalities that will stop building bicycle lanes because they took away so many of the roads that the traffic problem has become. So somebody had a great idea. Let's build bicycle lanes. And now the public is literally striking in some of the towns in Ontario where they're saying, look, there's one or two bicycles on the bicycle lanes and we are sitting here for hours in traffic, right? But somebody always has a good idea. But in the end, you as teaching it and the investors that buying it really, really have to study the details. Well, you talk about the governments. So right now it's 46-45, 46 NDP, 45 the Conservatives. I'm not really sure why we have to wait till next week, maybe even longer, but there's mail-in ballots and all of those kind of things going on. But the NDP, of course, brought in Bill 44. Would you see any changes under there if they get elected full time?
So if the NDP form a majority government, or if they stay in the minority?
If they, let's say a majority government.
Majority government, the NDP were strong through the campaigns that they were going to back small scale multi-unit housing, that they believed in more family oriented housing and traditionally single family neighborhoods. And if they form a majority government, I expect that they will continue to work with cities like on the North Shore and other cities that have limited uptake on the multiplex zoning. Even though it's approved, they don't have feasible bylaws yet. And I can expect the NDP with a majority government to continue to push cities to change the bylaws to allow for more family oriented housing to be built.
But so when you say uptake, you mean the buyer or the current owner or somebody is looking to actually do it? Or you mean the regulations from the city?
No, I'm referring to the regulations from the city. Currently, we only see Vancouver and Burnaby having regulations that cause for feasible developments. Every other city either doesn't allow them to be stratified, their FSR is too low, or the third one, they have a development permit process
Yeah.
with the developments have to conform to design guidelines and go through extra staff approval before they'll get to the building permit stage, which will cause the timelines to be expanded so long that it's not worthwhile investing into.
At the last video, somebody was asking what is an FSR? It stands for floor space ratio, I guess.
Yeah. Floor space ratio. So for example, in Vancouver, the FSR is a 1 FSR, which means if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, you multiply it by your floor space ratio, you can build a 10,000 square foot building. Mm-hmm. If you have a 0.3 FSR, like in Delta, or 0.35, if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, you can only build a 3,500 square foot building. Divide that by 4 units, and you have 800 square foot 2-bedroom condos, which defeats the purpose.
Competing with all sorts of other condos, which really does defeat the purpose. Now, we said the NDP. What if the Conservatives manage to get 2 seats and they now have the magical 47? They have had their own views on Bill 44.
The formal statements from the leader has been that the Conservatives will pull back the mandates. They will not force cities to rezone areas of their neighborhoods without the cities wanting to move forward. So they're going to create the flexibility for cities to select which areas within the cities can be multiplex or townhome. Mm-hmm. I see any flexibility like this given back to the city is essentially going to repeal the legislation because the cities are not equipped with mayors and councils to do public hearings within their communities and try and navigate the pro and for to find any reasonable way forward that they can select which parts of the cities will have and which parts won't.
I mean, there was a lot of other things the NDP brought in, was the almost elimination of public hearings on properties that already went through the process. Do you think the Conservatives would change that as well?
It seems like most of the messaging was that the public hearings and the discretion and allowing for local developments to approve the local zoning bylaws is the approach that the Conservatives were going to take.
So anyways, it can get gray hairs. Now let's say neither one of them wins and we have a minority government. What does that mean?
I think essentially it's going to be nothing changed. We won't see the NDP continuing to push cities like the North Shore to update their zoning bylaws. It'll leave whatever's been adopted today as what's going to run for the next 12 to 18 months. And then whenever we see a re-election and a new majority government is when we'll either see the small scale multi-unit housing being pushed by the province or being allowed to be interpreted the way that the cities want under the Conservative side.
Well, it's one would sort of as a quick take say it's a mess, but not really, because it does force anybody, including an investor or a homeowner or the municipality, to study the concept, right? Because we're talking about we all need more housing. Everybody agrees we need more affordable housing. And then we read the details, and I did with the Michael Campbell show last week. We just added up all of the taxes. It's really mind-boggling as to how many. Every time it seems to me that everybody sits around the table and they're fighting in the government. They're fighting as to who gets what of the pie, and then finally say, "Oh well, let's get it all and just put it onto the taxes." And so on the one hand, you have the taxes. Now you have regulations. In the end, you have a heck of a lot less construction, like right now. I mean, as I understand it, currently out of some 30 odd developments that were planned to be launched in September, 3 made it, 3 new developments. Everything else has been sort of regurgitated, like there were maybe 30 units short of their requirement in order to get financing or something like that. So when you have all that going on, does everybody really in government understand this? I don't think they're mean or they want to do us in, but by planning all of the eventualities and have sort of a social bias or not bias or conservatives coming out, we're going to do away with it all. Hey, in the end, there's somebody has to actually build the damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to go out there, take a chance, and borrow money, and all of those kind of things. And you can't do that if you have this multitude of regulations. But before we get all negative, we have survived every single government. In fact, the last time in 2008, I wrote a story for the Vancouver Sun. I called it, we are becoming the yeah butters. You know, we say yeah but to anything. So the NDP is in power. Yeah, but we go into a room and it's a nice day out there. People say, yeah, but tomorrow is going to rain, right? There was always this. And I said, hey, it doesn't matter the government. In the end, we, the people, are going to be building and we're looking for opportunities. Now, maybe you can share with us, what do you see as some feasible development sites in Metro Vancouver?
The feasible development sites are all based in Vancouver and Burnaby currently today. And this is where the majority conservative government could really assist with development moving forward. The conservative government said that they're not going to force cities like the North Shore or Delta or New Westminster, who have been reluctant to approve the multiplex zoning. They're not going to force them to update their zoning bylaws, but instead they're going to work with the municipalities who want to see family-oriented housing or small-scale multi-unit development, and they're going to assist them move through the process faster. So we could see our development projects in Burnaby be benefiting from the conservatives who were talking about having required building permits to be issued within 90 days of application, trusting the architects and the engineers' professional stamp, and not having as much back and forth with the city, which would also carry on to the second timeline commitment.
3 months.
3 months for building permits and 6 months for mandated rezoning applications to be approved or rejected, and similarly for development permit applications to be approved or rejected within 6 months. That would be very helpful for certainty on our timelines.
Well, you know, what I don't get is that during the election, that wasn't clear. All that was clear. And I noticed that even a lot of realtors were telling me, well, I got to vote NDP because I want to build that six packs. In just a minute, I said, there are some things in the guideline, like a 3 months turnaround for building permit. That's nirvana. That's heaven, you know. Is it even possible? And I know you need to be congratulated. You had seminars and you met with one of the conservative candidates, Ms. Chip DeGenova, and, you know, trying to educate, you know, what is at stake, you know. Okay,
Ozzie, let me say the second really important policy that the conservatives put forward that would be very beneficial was the $1 billion infrastructure fund, where the conservatives committed for the pro-development cities, and in this case could be like Vancouver and Burnaby with multiplex, they would step in and they would fund that infrastructure for the offsite upgrades, potentially being credit for the DCC costs and the city fees, the sidewalks, the curbs and gutters, all the street lights that we were talking about. The conservatives were talking about incentivizing the cities to go with multiplex by providing the funding for all of that offsite upgrades that would then allow for more building permits to be issued at a more reasonable cost.
well, and that, you know, again, I don't think it was clear to many people what the impact would be, because if I'm in a municipality and I'm an elected alderman or whatever, and I have to make a decision, and I'm going to add all these costs and have to collect it through taxes, I don't really care for that. But if the provincial government steps onto the plate, much easier for me to vote for it, right?
100%. One second.
Well, it's interesting when we look at the world at large. You know, we seem to be struggling to you know, create regulations and have less taxes and have a better life and all that. But in the end, we always get bogged down into the minutiae. And some of the things also is the timeline on yearly revenue, the yearly returns. You know, so why don't you explain that to us? Well, how important is that timeline?
The typical underwriting that we have for both a 6-story building or a multiplex is if you have $10 million in project costs, you're looking for a 20% return on cost. You'd be looking at revenues, potential gross sale revenues of $12 million, which would give you a $2 million profit.
200.
Yeah.
Yeah.
20% return on cost. And similarly, if you have that $10 million cost, traditionally the banks will come in and will finance 80% of it. So you'll have a $2 million equity requirement.
Right.
A $2 million equity requirement, $2 million profit. Generally, we're seeing the underwriting being 100% return on equity for a specific project.
Mm-hmm.
Now, take our 6-story developments. It takes 7 years for the project to complete, which causes that 100% to end up being about 15 to 20% annualized return over the 7-year period, which is fine and a good return and is traditionally how the real estate development market has been funded, and the types of returns that have been promised to investors have been in that range. What we've seen with multiplex is now that you don't have that 4-year approval timeline, projects can be completed within 3 years. So if you take that same 100% return on equity and you take it over 3 years, we're now seeing a 33% annual return because of these shortened timeframes.
And regardless of what government may think, that will interest an investor. And, you know, I mean, after all, I'm taking a risk. I could get 5 or 6% in the GIC. I could get maybe 8% in a mortgage fund, you know. So now I'm going to really take a chance. So that makes still a lot of sense now, but there's still risk. What is the biggest risk?
Well, we've both been in the business long enough to see a pro forma is only numbers on paper. I'll believe it once I see it. And that there definitely is risk. And the biggest risk that we're currently seeing is the revenue side. What is a multiplex? How much is it going to sell for? Is it the same as a duplex? Is it the same as a townhouse? If we have 220 applications in Vancouver and there's 1,200 units all coming to market next year, can we still rely on $1,100 a square foot? Is it going to drop to $900 a square foot? Majority of the underwriting and the work that we're doing is on the revenue side of the pro forma to understand what our end revenue is going to be.
Well, and that's why somebody like you is really needed. You need to take that pen to paper based on experience and know-how, and both good and bad experience, and so that to get that real clear picture. I mean, is there any new business models that are coming out of this small scale type of developments?
We've been working with a number of industry professionals that includes architects and designers, realtors, builders and developers who have extra time capacity, where they can work within their networks and help the other builders who are currently working on projects raise funds, earn commissions for helping connect your investors to the builders, while your builder is going to benefit because they'll be able to move up from doing 1 to 2 projects a year to 3 to 4 projects a year. And the investor is going to have opportunity to access these 20 to 30% returns, while you can earn the commission for being the conduit putting the two groups together.
Well, then to some extent, the slowdown in the market now may be an opportune time. Maybe you can get a better price buying the property, and B, the competition won't be that great. And since we're not building that many units, there's no glut, and so the prices should be relatively stable. Tomorrow, which would be October the 21st, we will know what the government is going to do in terms of interest rates, and everybody's expecting to have a 50% or half a percent point 50 decline of the rate, and I think it'll be at least 25, and if it's 25 tomorrow, then maybe it'll be 50 in December when they have another one. So we can really look at maybe 3.5% by year end, and maybe by middle of next year, most major banks think 2.5. I think it's probably one of the reasons why a lot of the buyers holding off and saying, you know, I'm going to wait for the mortgage rate to be down almost 2%, and on the average mortgage of about 600,000, it makes a huge difference. So what are you looking for next year in terms of the outlook for the markets?
We're looking at fairly conservative revenue numbers on interest rates. We're building our pro formas, maintaining a 7 to 8% interest expense yearly, and if it goes down, then we'll assign that back to the investors as profit, or we'll have extra contingency for other parts of the business model. We're seeing fairly consistent with the higher interest rates in our underwriting, and then our revenue projections, we're being very conservative. We're looking at the most exclusive single family neighborhoods. So for example, the Government Road area in Burnaby, Deer Lake or Buckingham Heights, where there's never been family-oriented housing under $2 million, bringing in a brand new 3-bedroom townhouse in that $1.5 to $1.6 million range. We feel comfortable on the revenue side in those specific neighborhoods, but it's going to be area by area, and it's going to be interesting to see what type of product comes out of all of these new zoning updates.
So depending on when you're listening to either the podcast or whether you're seeing this video, I know on November 14, you've organized sort of a mini convention of small builders. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, on November 14th, it's currently booked for Science World, 11 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. We sold 100 tickets in the first 24 hours, and we expect we're going to have to upgrade to a larger venue. So stay tuned for the venue. It's going to be 8 small builders who currently have multiplex projects in both Burnaby and Vancouver. And they're going to walk you through their previous projects, their current business models, and the projects that they have under application today, with opportunities for investment, joint ventures, or homeowner participation coming out of the event.
It'll be great to talk. You will be there, right? So there'll be some, the experts will be there. There'll be architects. It'll be a great time to spend rubbing shoulders with all the people that are as interested as you might be. How do I get a ticket? Can you sort of spell out the telephone number? And I put it on the bottom, and as well as your email, I put it into the description. But for the podcasters, give me a number slowly.
778-886-3300.
Oh, that's a nice number, 886-3300. So at that, you can buy a ticket at that number and get more information, particularly if the venue changes. And what about I know you're having courses and classes. Are you putting out a fall schedule for that?
Yes, our next multiplex intensive will launch in January. That's everything from how to find a profitable opportunity, how to acquire the project, conduct your feasibility study, and raise equity. It'll take you from acquisition to development permit application, mostly focused on Vancouver and Burnaby.
Sounds like a course that everybody should take. The details on that, including the investment, we'll be getting on Bill's website below. Bill, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that you're a busy man nowadays. Everybody's wondering what's going to happen and what shall we do. Well, none better than to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you, Ozzie. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.